Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to our latest and the final Search Master Speaker Series event for spring 2022, where we explore the foundations and practice of search, skills, education, and literacy. Today we have Cheryl Knott, who is a professor in the School of Information at the University of Arizona, where she teaches an undergraduate online searching course, as well as graduate courses on information intermediation and government information. She's the author of Find the Information You Need, Rowman and Littlefield 2016, a textbook designed for end users of databases and other online information resources. In her research, which focuses on the history of print culture, she uses online searching to find secondary sources in a number of related disciplines and primary sources in physical archives and digital collection. Her book, Not Free, Not for All, Public Libraries in the Age of Jim Crow, University of Massachusetts Press, won the Eliza Atkins Gleason Award from the American Library Association's Library History Roundtable and the Lillian Smith Book Award from the Southeast Regional Council. She has recently taken on the task of updating the second edition of Karen Markey's textbook, Online Searching, a guide to finding quality information efficiently and effectively. And in this talk, she'll report on some of the challenges involved in updating that book. So before I turn it over to Cheryl, I did want to just make one mention that there will be Q&A, and you're welcome to put your questions either in the Q&A or in the chat. If you put your questions in the chat area, make sure that you share with all participants if you want everyone to see what you have to say. Otherwise, it will just be the panelists and the moderator. So welcome, Cheryl. We're really happy to have you and looking forward to hearing about your thoughts about revision of the book. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Let's see. Great. Okay, so as Marianne was just saying, and thank you, Marianne, for that introduction, I am working on a revision of Karen Markey's Online Searching. It's in the second edition right now, and I'm working on the third edition. And I'm really grateful to be here today because I'm right in the middle of it, and I am really looking forward to hearing comments and questions. I know they will improve the final product. So Karen Markey's work is used in quite a few different courses in iSchools and Library and Information Science Master's programs in particular. And it's been acclaimed for its really well organized text and for its the information being presented so clearly. There are a lot of illustrations and figures and tables, and it's really beautifully done. I myself blurbed the second edition. You can see my quotation on the back cover. But this is the #1 challenge, right? Is to not mess this up. So that's another reason why I'm super grateful to be talking to you all today. So the 3 challenges I think I'll limit myself to today are the whole concept of recall. So the librarian's traditional approach, there's a lot of stuff out there, create a precise search statement to try to winnow the results down to the relevant material for your particular project. The Googleized approach will retrieve it all, but we'll rank it so you can see the most relevant material first. And then the second challenge has to do with the search engine results page. And it relates to this recall question. Why bother to craft very carefully a very precise search when we have these AI-driven search engines that will do the work for you? And I'm clearly overstating and overgeneralizing everything here, but I'm trying to be concise. And I think one of the interesting things about SERPs is that that's the place where we see the filters. So you can create a search, look at what you've got, and on the results page, make changes or home in on what you're needing. And then the whole idea of change. So, you know, working on a book, you know that by the time it's published, it's going to be out of date, at least parts of it. So thinking a little bit about, particularly for the audience for this book, how to talk about the legacy systems and the traces of them that are still in databases. So just a little bit of background. As Marianne said, I did publish this textbook for undergrads back in 2016. It is definitely out of date now. And Karen Markey's book, the second edition and the first edition, we both published with the same publisher, Rowman Littlefield. We both know Charles Harmon, who is just an incredible editor there, just the very best. And so when Karen Markey retired and decided not to do the third edition herself, she invited me, and I was thrilled to accept the invitation, but also scared. So just to give you a sense of my undergrad course, where at the end of the semester, I always ask students to reflect on what they have learned. It's really quite interesting how they talk about coming into the course being completely confident in their web search skills, and at some point realizing that there are all these other resources, namely the commercial databases available at the library website that they did not know about, and if they did know about them, had not mastered the art of creating good searches and evaluating their results. So that has helped guide me. I think it's the same thing for graduate students in many cases. They really appreciate learning learning in depth how to use databases as they're intermediating between the databases and other information resources and the students and faculty they're serving at the university. So I did a little short proposal on what I would change in the third edition, and Charles Harmon sent it to 3 anonymous reviewers, all of whom have been using Karen Markey's book. And I just picked out a couple here that I really am acting on. The first one, that students and professionals are interested in learning more about how to use web search engines better. And certainly Dan Russell's talk in the Search Mastery Speaker Series was extremely helpful to me. And his book is extremely helpful for understanding not only how to search, but how to think about searching. And then another comment that I thought was invaluable from one of the reviewers is this idea that the audience should be broadened for the book. And the way to do that is to provide more examples and to just discuss more specifically how teacher librarians and school librarians can use some of this work. So it's possible to generalize from the book, but I'm trying to incorporate more concrete examples there. And certainly Jerry Fales and Sola Perez talk about some of the tools they're creating to help children use online resources. That talk has been extremely helpful and gotten me thinking a little bit more creatively about how to incorporate material into the book. So I'm going to go through these challenges in a bit more detail. And that number 1 challenge of recall, one of the comments from one of the anonymous reviewers was that students have a hard time understanding proximity and proximity operators and why you would use them. So proximity operators are in database search systems to make it possible when you're searching using keywords, free text, searching through full text resources, ways to bring together your two keywords. So you might have an operator like W/2, and that means the first word within 2 words of the second word. And the idea is to have them in the same sentence, in the same paragraph, close together. The sense is that that will be more relevant than if one word is in the first paragraph of the full text and the second word is in the 18th paragraph. So trying to think a little bit more about that when we're talking about this balance between recall and precision. That's something else I'll be working on. So I really like this quotation from a book published years ago, but I think it's still relevant. It certainly is among my students. This idea that when you're accustomed to searching the web using a search engine, it creates an expectation that search will be easy and that the results on the first screen will be relevant and what you need. And because we've been trained that way, in a sense, then we don't know about the more sophisticated, if you'll let me say it that way, search systems and information organization that underlies databases. That a lot of students don't know about those things and don't feel comfortable with the more involved interfaces that they encounter there. So the librarian's approach to search is to cast a wide net to try to capture every potentially useful or relevant source. So in the subscription databases, you can use natural language free text keywords through the whole text. You can use the Boolean or between synonyms or related keywords, again, to make sure you're not missing something just because an author calls it one thing and you call it something else. And then stemming or truncation, using just the stem of a word and then a symbol to tell the system to search all the endings, the ing, the es, the s, the ed, so that you're not missing something, and wildcards for variant word spellings and endings. And then the second step is to sort of mitigate this recall and try to create a method for being more precise and having more relevant results. So using the Boolean and to combine sets for 2 different concepts in the topic that you're working on so that you only get the overlap. Incorporating proximity operators, as I mentioned, and then also using controlled vocabulary terms or subject descriptors, those special words that are not natural language keywords, but that they are subject headings or subject descriptors that experts have decided are the correct terms or the preferred terms to use for your topic. And I'm sorry if you all know all of this already. Just trying to be clear, I guess, about what I'm talking about. So that's the librarian's approach when we're talking about commercial databases at library websites. Everybody else's approach is greater recall, right? So the everything search boxes or the big discovery system approaches to library materials. So those have created, so you get a search box on the library homepage and it searches everything, not just the library catalog, but the commercial databases, the paywalled information, so that students and faculty using these search boxes get material from all different kinds of information resources available to them. The commercial databases have done some interesting revisions on their search systems, I think mostly in response to Google the success of Google and the approach that's used by web search engines. So fields that used to be phrase indexed are now word indexed. Even the subject field, where the emphasis is on using a subject descriptor, which can be a phrase, those fields are still word indexed, and you still have to force the subject descriptor itself to be read as a phrase for the greatest precision. So you force it by putting quotation marks around it. And phrase searching isn't even strict. So if in my field, if you search history of the book and you put it in quotation marks to force a phrase search, even in some database search systems, the of and the are stop words. They're not searched even when they're inside quotations. And then again, there's automatic word stemming. You don't even necessarily in some search systems have to use a truncation device at the end of a stem, a word stem. There is often automatic pluralization, but also close variants that the search system recognizes may be included in your search results. And similarly, built-in proximity searching, there are search systems, databases that automatically search for words within 4 or 5 words of each other. And then which field search. So the default search fields, that the select a field default, where you don't select a field, you just let the search happen wherever the search system has programmed it to happen. You get a kind of subject by proxy. So author supplied keywords, which are not a controlled vocabulary, they're just add-ons that the authors of an article thought would be helpful. Those turn up obviously when a keyword search is done, but when author supplied keywords are included as subjects, you're getting both controlled vocabulary terms and these sort of uncontrolled author supplied terms. So all of these work toward pulling in, casting a wide net, pulling in more and more results. So the challenge, and the number 2 challenge is recall. And here I have a nice example of exactly what Michael Schachter was talking about in his discussion of SERP and the Bing approach. So I've done a search here for plutonium research, and this is just the top part of the search results page. And it's extremely helpful because it offers a encyclopedia entry on plutonium. It gives you sort of a top result from the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, government agency or installation that you would expect to know a lot about plutonium and to be doing plutonium research. You have the people also ask in case maybe your search needs to be refined a bit. If you scroll down on this screen, you find photographs of researchers in this area and biographical information about them. And so it's an incredibly useful and sort of content-laden results page that takes a lot of careful looking at and is also helpful and instructive in its own way. So that's a good way of thinking about the results page and what it offers in terms of search and retrieval revision. So from that search page, you can learn a lot. I mean, that results page, you can learn a lot. You can see ways to, in effect, revise your search by clicking on some of those options. So as I said, the Bing perspective discussion was really useful, and I'm thinking carefully about how to incorporate that into the book. And I think one of the things that students in particular need to understand is this sort of constant monitoring of how users interact with results and the constant adjustments that are being made to retrieval and ranking, so that what you search, as he said in his talk, what you searched, 5 minutes ago, if you search it again, you might get different results, because particularly in breaking news kinds of stories where things are being updated all the time and more people are asking questions about the topic. So that dynamism is very important for students to understand. And I think also students need to understand that companies that are making a lot of money can really do some very interesting things with their search results pages. So as a contrast to that, here's a SERP from a non-commercial, USA.gov, our tax dollars at work. Do the same search, plutonium research, and you get a very different look and feel and content on those search results page. And you also get just a few, two other ways to filter your results. So you can look at images or videos, but these are all going to be government information resources, both at the federal level and at the state and local level. So here's a long quote. I'm breaking a rule of slideshows, but I did the one chapter in the book that I've completely started from scratch is chapter 8 on web search engines, because so much has changed since the second edition. And this is about midway through the book. And I was working on this chapter when these talks were happening. And it really has made a difference in how I think about search engines and results pages. And so here's something I say in that chapter. Again, this is a draft. This could change, but I'm telling students, you don't have to always focus on the results when you're revising. I mean, it's a standard operating procedure, right? That you look at your results of your first search and you revise your search based on what you're seeing. So what I'm telling students is that if you can craft a really good search to get started, you're going to have probably fewer but better results to look through, and that those may inspire better revisions for your search, a better approach. So you learn as you search, and it helps you recraft or revise the search strategies. And I like quoting from someone from Google on this topic, that it's best to be fluent in both search and retrieval, right, to save time, but also to find higher quality material. And at the end of chapter 8, I have recommended readings, and Dan Russell's The Joy of Search is listed right there. So there are, for me at least, I think of sort of the broad terms of finding information, the ways that people typically might find information. So lateral linking, exactly what we think about when we use Google or other web search engines. Browsing, which is the idea of sort of drilling down through categories, and then iteration and reiteration, more the approach you might take when you're working as a reference librarian with students and doing searching in databases. So to think just a little bit about browsing and that question that the anonymous reviewer raised about adding more information for school librarians and teacher librarians, to think a little bit about browsing as a good strategy for those students. So yes, a database like this, Scale in Context for elementary students, thinking about keywords, and I think the idea of helping students learn how to spell correctly or choose from a list of words. That's an incredible tool that's going to be really helpful. Again, learned from the Search Mastery Speaker Series. But for many students, I think, and even for people new to a topic, adults new to a topic, it's helpful to just have categories and subcategories to drill down through, so that you don't have to try to come up with a good search statement. And you don't necessarily, when you do a search, have to try to figure out what you're seeing when you're looking at the results page. So I always like to give a nod to browsing, and browsing in a little bit more technical term than just our everyday sense of browsing. So this idea that information has been organized for you and labeled for you, and that you can just drill down to the categories that look like where the information you need is going to be found. And then the more librarian approach to search, which is iteration and reiteration, or coming up with a search statement and then revising it based on what you see in the results. Online Searching Second Edition has a figure process chart that I'm definitely retaining because it's a useful way to think about. This is in chapter 3, which is devoted to the reference interview. So the first step of intermediation in a library, where the reference interview negotiates the question that the information seeker has and crafts a search based on it. Thinks about what kind of search needs to be done. Is it a fact the person's looking for? Is it a known item? The person knows it exists, but they can't remember enough about it to find it on their own. Or they just can't find something they do know a lot about on their own. Conducting a facet analysis, if it's a research topic that someone's working on a paper, for example, thinking about the 2 different or more than 2 different facets of a topic and how you would combine those using Boolean operators, how you would make the search both broader with the or and narrower with the and so on, selecting relevant database, doing the search, looking at the results. And this is in a sense what you're seeing here, the iteration, but the reiteration is represented by those arrows that you see going back up. So it's not necessary, it is a step-by-step process, but that doesn't mean that each step is finished, that it's always possible, particularly when you're working with a human being, an information seeker, to go back and renegotiate, to rethink based on what you've learned from the search you've done so far, and that kind of approach. So I think it's pretty clear that the Google approach to search has had a huge impact on all of us. Librarians, information scientists doing research, students, researchers in other areas, it's just had a huge impact. And one of the biggest impacts I think I've already alluded to is on the commercial database providers and their tweaking and revising of their own search systems and the underlying information organization in databases to again make search, or at least make interfaces a little bit simpler, a little bit more obvious what needs to be done, more user-friendly, as they say. And so I think it's really clear that, as I said, web search engines have had a huge impact on us and how we think about finding information. But I think that chapter 8, what I'm trying to do is work it the other way and think a little bit about this librarian approach. So the librarianization of web search, and I've used my little truncation device there, librarianizing web search. I don't know. It's kind of fun to play with words when you're doing searching. So chapter 8 really tries to get at, can we use the skills that we're developing to work in libraries, particularly in reference and information services, to apply those skills. So these are the skills that have been learned up to chapter 8 in the book so far. Can we use some of those skills and apply them when we're searching the web? And so this is an approach to answering that question about, or the comment from the reviewer about adding more. People are curious, how can I be better at Google searching? So here's another little excerpt from chapter 8. And it's to say that these search engines do have advanced search interfaces, those sort of advanced search interfaces you might find on a commercial database. But they're not highlighted or promoted, again, because the sense is that you should be able to just go to a search box, throw your keywords in, and let AI and ranking do the work for you, which works really well. So that's the assumption, but I think students need to be aware that, as the last sentence here says, search engines are in the business of improving results and not necessarily in the business of helping you improve your searches or your skills as a searcher. And I'll just mention, that sounds perhaps harsh or overgeneralizing, and I'll just mention that I did say when we were looking at the Bing SERP for plutonium research that there's a lot of help there, a lot of guidance. They're serving up content, but they're also giving you different ways of thinking about it. And of course, Google does the same thing by giving you, people also ask sort of suggestions and that kind of thing. But in general, I want students to see that there's an advanced search function that can be extremely useful, and you don't necessarily have to always come back to this advanced search interface. Once you know it exists, you can learn the shortcuts to use in a single search box. So here's the Google Advanced Search screen. I don't know, maybe you've all seen this before, maybe you're regular users. It's findable through the little settings link in the lower right-hand side of the Google search page. And it used to be somewhere else. I can't even remember anymore. So you can just fill in the boxes, right? And so all the words, all of these words is like a Boolean and, I guess, the exact word or phrase, obviously, and so on. You can also, which I always find helpful, filter or narrow your results by site or domain. So if you're working on a topic, a science topic like air pollution, which also involves government policy, government data, government websites are probably going to be a really good narrow approach to so limiting to that domain can be very useful. And you'll also notice that in small type, to the right of the boxes are little instructions for sort of what happens. So for the exact word or phrase, you can see that it's telling you to put phrases in quotation marks. That's pretty standard. So here's my search for Houston, Texas, air pollution as a phrase, and either the term poison or toxin. And there are two things to notice on this search results page. Unlike a lot of Google searches, there are only 24,000 results. One of the things I've noticed about undergraduate students in particular, when we're working on exercises, they're usually pretty happy when they are working in a commercial database and they get 24,000 results. That they're comfortable with that. And again, it's that idea of recall, and part of the job of that course is to help them think about how 24,000 results is too many, particularly if you're working in a commercial database where results come out most recent first, or they're presented most recent first, not necessarily right relevant. But what the other thing here is so important, I think, is to see in the search box exactly what you could have typed in without having to go to the advanced search screen. So here's a good way to learn, right? Here's a good way to see what back in the day we might have called a command line search or an expert search. You know what to do, you know where to put your Boolean operator, you know to use the quotation marks, you know how to limit to a particular domain, and you can just throw all of that in the one single search box. So just a little bit here, the search system typical to a commercial database versus a search engine. And just thinking again about that small type of the instructions to the right of the search boxes on the Google Advanced Search screen, you can see that the implied Boolean and, which is very common in database search screens, the space between two keywords is typically operating as the Boolean and. So both of those keywords have to be somewhere in the result that's retrieved, the Boolean or the forced phrase. And we might think of domain type as a kind of fielded searching, so limiting just to a particular domain might be similar to limiting to a particular kind of material or a particular location or publisher. And you can also, in most commercial databases that index scholarly journals, you can, and other material, you can use a document type. You can search the index for document type and limit just to articles or books or dissertations or book reviews. You can do that right on the search screen. You can also find those filters on the results page. And that might be comparable to the file type limiter that you can use that's shown on the advanced search page. So file type means, you know, PDF, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, and so on. And I have in the past really struggled a bit to understand why you would want to limit to a PDF. I think it's useful to limit to an Excel spreadsheet when what you're looking for is data that you can do something with, or that kind of thing. But I'll show you an example of using file type as a limiter. So here's a search where we did not use file type as a limiter, and you see the SERP that shows an authoritative video from a government source on how to do a science fair project. We also see at the bottom a website. These are just the first two results from an .org. That's basically web screens, web pages about how to do a project. And I think I put in the word guidelines in my search, but here's guide. So that gives me a clue about one way to possibly revise my search. So if I revise my search to this one, Science Fair Guidelines or Guide and file type PDF, I might want to do that, and this is an example I'm using in the book. I might want to use that file type PDF so that I can have something easily printable that can be referred to, handed out, taken to a teacher's meeting where you're trying to figure out your newest science project plans, or used by students at the bench, right, when they're actually putting together their science fair projects and they need to quickly turn to something. So not a video, maybe not also looking at web pages while they're working on their science project. So this is a possibility. And I think the other thing here is that when you use that file type, when you know what you're looking for is a PDF you can easily print from, you can really get your results down, and your search results page is going to go straight to PDFs, right? So 145,000 results, but still better. And that to the right is just one example of what we found. So, and it's several pages long, and you can, I believe it's a Creative Commons license, so it could be used. All right, so challenge number 3, and I'll just wrap this up, is the whole process of change that happens while you're writing. And after I turned in a draft with chapter 8, I became aware of these 2 headlines. So, chapter 8's out of date now, but I'm cool with that. That's to be expected. I think what I'm having a little bit more trouble thinking about is this idea that databases carry their history into the present. And this is where Jordan Boyd Graber's talk about Manchester versus Cranfield, I think, was really useful for just thinking about where we've come from and how far we've come in terms of search and retrieval. And traces of these print systems and the way that indexes in print work, they're still in our databases. The ERIC used to be published in print form in bound volumes, and it was not easy to use, but it was really quite impressive what you could discover using it. And there were 2 different document formats. There were ERIC indexed journal articles in the educational field, and also sort of not peer reviewed, but still useful reports, lesson plans, that kind of thing. And those were issued on microfiche. So print and microfiche, a deadly combination. And then other indexes and abstracts, such as psychological abstracts, had a classified arrangement with an index by subject and author. But if you looked at the main volume, it was classified in these broad categories. So similar to browsing and drilling down. So just to look at ERIC, on the left is that's a little excerpt from the help screen that you can get to. This is from EBSCO Host. Click on help, scroll all the way down to find the ERIC in particular help, and you can see what some of these fields are that are searchable. And here's an example where you can see that things like the descriptors are now word indexed. I referred to that earlier. And at the bottom, you can see this TY, that's type, and it lets you search by either ERIC documents, what used to be on microfiche, and many of those have been digitized now, or EJ, the journal articles. This is not a field. This is an indexed field. It's searchable, but it's not offered when you use the select a field pull down menu. So it's hidden. It's a legacy feature. It still works but you have to know about it. So here's an example. It's what, 500,000 results. Just those are the ERIC documents. This is fun. It's arcane, I know. Okay, and then psychological abstracts, as I said, the main volumes were organized into categories, and the categories had numbers assigned to them. And I think category 3000 is for social psychology, and you can search it still in Psych Info, and I've done it there, CC 3000. And I have this purple arrow just to point out that CC 3000 is a category, a broad subject area within psychology or within psych abstracts. And at the same time, you can see that the subject descriptors are more specific and more likely to be used to retrieve information. But just thinking a little bit about how useful is this sort of legacy feature, would I want to include that in the book? Is it too detailed or just too unhelpful? I'm still grappling with that. And what you saw in both of those examples too was the legacy of the command line expert search box, where you know a field can be searched and you know how to search it. And on that note, I think I'll just let you ponder this dialogue blue sheet that I actually found on the Internet Archive. These were literally paper copies on blue paper that told you all of the different search fields and ways to search when you were using the old dialogue search system, which is a whole history article in and of itself. So thank you. Please ask questions. I'd be happy to answer.
I'll start with a question while other people are kind of formulating. Oh wait, let me see. I see something here. Let's see. So from Beth, so we have an anonymous attendee asked this question. I'm kind of thinking how to phrase this here, but I guess I'll put it this way. When do you think your book will be, the new version of the book will be published? And are there ways that people can get advanced copies?
Oh, it's due in the middle of August. So, you know, there's a whole process there. I would expect it to be, I'm not quite sure when it will be available, next year sometime. And I don't know about advanced copies. I'll ask Charles Harmon about that. Presumably they would want reviews to be done, so I'll ask. Thanks for the question.
Okay, all right. And then we have Beth St. Jean is asking, she's asking, we often see the finding that nearly everyone is overconfident about their ability to search online, and she thinks it might stem from getting some results. Any results and not seeing, not seeing what your search did not retrieve. So she wonders if it would be helpful to teach, when teaching search skills, to show two SERPs side by side, one with the user's query and associated results, and the other with an optimized version of the query and associated results, so that a user can see the differences between one search strategy and another.
Thanks, Beth. The short answer is yes, that's a brilliant idea. It will happen. Thank you. I think that's a really useful way to make it very obvious to students what's happening and what they need to be thinking about. So thanks.
Let's see if there's something in the chat here. Somebody's asking about the people commenting on the on videos and historical legacy videos, and they're saying please keep them. I have a follow-up question to what Beth asked, and it's kind of related to what can we do to encourage people. If you have ideas about encouraging people to go beyond the first few entries in a search in a SERP, the first 4 or 5 results. And then I'm also curious if this behavior where users are really being trained by the search engines, unless they're trained, really formally trained otherwise, to rely on the first few results, but mostly because of local search and the type of searches that some people do on mobile. And I wonder if that's transferring to what you're seeing in the library databases, and whether there's some degradation maybe of an approach and a little bit more thorough examination of the search results.
Yeah, I think going past the first few results really works well with what Beth was suggesting as well. So I sometimes jump to like screen 8, to see how bad it gets. And I think it would be useful to do something like that. So to use the 2 screens that Beth suggested, and then also a couple of screens of, okay, here's the first screen of results, here's the 5th screen of results. But I think what's one thing that I've started wondering about is why even tell people there are 2 million results? I'm not quite sure. And I think I have seen maybe some experiments with this of just not even offering all the results, right? Just the most highly ranked ones. It still doesn't answer the question of what we're missing, but it might help people, students in particular, not be so cavalier about, well, they don't even notice there were 485,000 results, because they're focused so much on that first screen. But it does set them up when they're in a commercial database to, again, not naturally come to the conclusion, if you have 24,000 results in a commercial database with this whole sophisticated information organization underlying it, it doesn't just naturally occur to them that that's too many, and that just looking at the first set of results or the first screen of results isn't going to do them much good, because a lot of databases are still, the default is to show most recent publications first, and you have to take an extra step to show relevant first. So anytime in a database, you have to take an extra step, use a pull down menu, check a box, go to settings and change to relevance. That's all extra effort, and it's the kind of effort that they don't necessarily have to do using a web search engine.
Cheryl, I'll mention to you, there's a little bit of activity going on in the chat back and forth about Google results and how many actually come back. And so we're hearing from some of us. We're talking back and forth, and Dan's on the
Oh, good.
Dan's here today, and so make everybody aware that Google actually shortens its results to 300 to 400. So if you click at the end of at the very last page that you have, you'll see how many it returns to you. Around 400, and he's saying that the results, the quality of the results, that the quality of the results kind of drops off after the first 20 or so. And he's also saying, Dan, I should just let you talk rather than talking about your chat. But he's also saying that it's worth noting that the number of results is a real approximation.
Thank you, Dan. A real approximation. Thank you. That's helpful.
Other questions? Okay, then oh, wait, hang on. I'm trying to get Dan's mic here, but I can't get him on here. Let me see if I can. I can't. Sorry, Dan. I'd like to turn your mic on. Oh, wait, let me see. No, I can't do it. I'd like to get your mic on, but I can't. So,
well, you just fixed it.
oh, I did?
Yay.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Anything to add to what I was talking about from the chat?
No. I think it's all pretty good. One thing I might add to Cheryl's commentary here is that rather than going to page 8 of the results, what I do is look at different search engines. So Joyce mentioned Million Short. So if I was going to do something and I wanted to get different perspectives on a query, I would look at Google, I would look at Bing, I would look at Million Short, I would actually check the top page or two of very different search engines. And the reason is that they have very, very different relevance metrics. So the top 10 or 20 or 30 results of those different search engines might be very, very different, but they will all be high quality, just as judged by different algorithms. So that's probably a more useful strategy.
Yes. It also has to do, I think, with the web crawlers, if you will. So when we use DuckDuckGo, you're not seeing Google Scholar results, right? So thinking about that a little bit too, what's indexed in effect when you use the different search engines, I think is also very useful. And what's front and center in a sense. So one search engine might really emphasize shopping and products, and another might not. You might find more academic material in another using a different one. So all of those considerations I think are really useful and will be great additions to the Chapter 8 draft. So thank you all for those suggestions. That's why I came here today. Really appreciate it.
Okay, so this was great, Cheryl. Thank you very much. I'm just going to put this last slide up here as we kind of wrap up. I really appreciate everybody's participation today. Thanks again, Cheryl, for super interesting talk. It was a great way, a really good hour, and a perfect way to wrap things up in terms of thinking about how to compare results and how to improve our own search skills and practices, in addition to teaching other people how to do that. We look forward to your book. So keep us posted about when it's coming and all of that. Maybe we can have you back after when you finish Chapter 8, and you can show us how it evolved. And I want to tell people that this is the last speaker event for spring 2022. We will be in touch in the fall. If anybody who's who's been participating has ideas or thoughts, or anybody that you'd like to have come and speak to us, or if you would like to come and speak with us, just drop me a note, and we'll talk to you about how to participate. So thanks again. We'll see everybody in the next series.